Welcome to Explore Purpose, a podcast designed to inspire you to live a life of purpose so that you can have a greater impact on the world around you. Hi, my name is Conrad Weaver. I'm your host, and I'm excited to share this new content with you today. I'm so grateful you stopped by to listen or to watch. Thanks for being here. Is it possible to build a company that looks like God's kingdom? And what does that even mean? Scott Ryser has made it his purpose to do that. Scott grew up going to church every week, but he never knew God. And when he finally dedicated his life to Christ in 1995, he knew he was making a decision about his Tuesday, not just his Sunday. Since then, Scott has spent most of his time wrestling with the practical challenges of living out his faith at work every day. When the opportunity to start his own company arose, Scott called it Yakabod, which means God's glory, pushing the question, is it even possible for a company to give God glory? And not by doing church stuff at the office, but by doing work in a way that glorifies God. And as Scott slowly started making progress, the question became, is it possible to partner with God at work every day? At this point, Scott began to realize that God plays by a completely different set of rules, and things just work differently in God's kingdom. This ultimately led to an even bigger question: can a company look more like the kingdom of heaven? Besides being a business leader and a CEO, Scott is also an outdoor enthusiast, adventure seeker. He's an author and a former vocalist for a couple of Christian rock bands. Today, he's my guest right here on the Explore Purpose podcast, where we're going to have a conversation about what it means to run a company whose purpose is to look like God's kingdom. Hey, if you enjoy this podcast, please invite your friends to listen too. And leave a rating and a review. I'd really appreciate that. And be sure to follow Explore Purpose on all the social media sites, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. I'd love to connect with you there. And thanks for being here today. And now here's my conversation with Scott Ryser. Well, welcome, Scott Ryser, to the Explore Purpose podcast. I'm so glad you're able to join me today for this conversation.
Great. Thanks, Conrad. Yeah, looking forward to it.
So give us just the cliff notes of who you are and what do you do?
Well, I'm currently the founder and CEO of Yakabod, which is a software company here in beautiful, historic downtown Frederick. And I recently released a book called At Work as in Heaven, which is about the faith journey I've been on these last 20 years with the company. So that's the 30,000 foot view. Of course, there's plenty of other things, but
sure.
Yeah, we can dig into that if need be.
I want to start with why Yakabod. It's an interesting name for a company.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when I started the company, it was like 2001. And if you'll remember, that was the days of the .com domain name land grab. And everybody was making up words for company names, right?
Right.
And I vaguely remember one that was like, whatever, it was the Persian word for surfer dude. I thought, now we're really getting out there, right? So when I got the opportunity to start the company, I knew there was just no way it was going to work if God wasn't in it. And so I was willing from the beginning to put his name on the wall. And so I went to my, what's the Hebrew lexicon? You know what I mean? The concordance.
The concordance,
not the concordance.
The
one
Hebrew
where you
dictionary.
Basically Hebrew dictionary, the Strong's numbers and all that.
Gotcha.
Anyways, I found Yakabod. Kabod is the weighty, heavy, mighty glory of God, and so then I did Yakabod, which is God's glory, and verified it with a few of my seminary attending friends, and that became the company name because the URL was available. But just kind of a decision from the beginning that I was just gonna. If I was going to do it, I was going to do it for God's glory, and that was right in the company's name.
So it sounded like you had really intentionally created a company that really was ingrained with direction from God, and that God was in the center of what you're doing. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, yeah, and I won't say I necessarily had clear direction exactly what I was going to do, but I certainly had a call. I knew that he'd put it in me to start a company, that was clearly something, that he'd put in me. And I also knew that it had no chance of no chance of actually making it off the ground if he wasn't in it. And
Hmm.
so there were kind of those two angles both
Hmm.
coming at it. So then there was a bit of stumbling and walking and journeying, to kind of figure out, what exactly that company would look like. And
Hmm.
of course, that's 20 years worth of learning, and I'm still learning.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I
that
want to
was
get
it.
into how that has played out, but I want to first go back. What led you to that point in your life where you said, you know what, I got to give it all. I got to, kind of commit this company to God and to his work. What led you, where were you before that, and what led you to that point?
Yeah, so I had an interesting journey. I don't know what your journey has been, Conrad, but I grew up going to church every Sunday
Hmm.
when I was a kid, kind of a denominational Protestant church, and it was part of the fabric of the community, the small town I grew up in Ohio. And I did church, but I never knew God.
Yeah.
I'm still friends today with some of the people I had as friends from the youth group back then,
Hmm.
but I never knew God. And so there's a long story here, and I tell some of it in the book, and I won't
Hmm.
bore you with all the details, but basically, God, in this crazy sense of humor of his, kind of architected circumstances to cause me to confront my own spiritual standing or lack thereof in my, I guess it was the later 20s, upper 20s. And I knew I had a decision to make. And I knew if I made that decision, I wasn't just going to go to church. It wasn't only going to be about Sunday. I mean, I'd done that and never knew God. So if it didn't work on my Tuesday and my Wednesday and my Thursday, I might as well just be out, climbing rocks or backpacking or something
Hmm.
instead of going to church. So that kind of brought me to this. Once I made the decision, I was all in. Now I was still a number of years away from having the opportunity to start a company, but right away I started trying to figure out, well, what does this mean on my Tuesday? And like most of your listeners, probably I was at work on Tuesday. So how does that play together?
Yeah.
What does this
Yeah.
thing mean? Like, how do I live out this faith at work? And that started me on a journey. So
I knew there was another reason that I liked you. You're a fellow Buckeye because I grew up in a small town in
there you
Ohio
go.
too.
Yeah.
What part of Ohio
I
did you
am.
grow up in?
I grew up in a little town called Salem, Ohio, Northeast Ohio, over by
I
Youngstown.
know exactly
How
where it's
about
at.
you?
I grew up in a little town called Beach City, Ohio, which is in Stark
Okay.
County. Uh, and really, my grandparents lived in Sugar Creek, Ohio, Amish world, as my kids call it. And that's kind
Oh,
of
yeah.
the area and community I grew up in. So,
Stark County, was that over towards Canton?
yeah, Canton is the county seat, and we were in
Yeah.
southern
Okay.
Stark County. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Great.
I have family in Minerva, so up over near
Yeah.
Salem.
I've
Yeah.
got cousins in Minerva. Well,
We
there you
might be
go.
related. Who knows?
Yeah, who knows? Yeah. Probably, 50, 100 years
Yeah.
ago. Yeah.
So, um, anyway, so when you started this company, you named it Yakabod. So, how did that play out? How did it play out to put God in the center of your company?
Well, that took some learning too, because a lot of I talked to my Christian friends, and a lot of them just didn't like it didn't compute.
Hmm.
So, and I wasn't seeing a lot of material out there. I know there were some books, some people trying to, I'd have a good way to describe or put that in a context now, but back then it was more principle based, more follow these biblical principles, and that was all good. Of course, principles are good. Um, but I knew there was more than that. I also I had some friends that were trying to do Christian companies, quote unquote,
Mm-hmm.
and like what did that mean when
Hmm.
some of them were like they'd only hire Christians or they'd
Hmm.
only do work for church, build software for churches, and I knew that wasn't what I was called
Hmm.
to, and then I also saw some others that were doing like it was about integrity. But that's table stakes.
Hmm.
Like it just. In fact, when I started the company too, then those were the days of Enron, who
Hmm.
had integrity
Yeah.
splashed all over their website, right? So then I really knew that it was about more than just integrity. That better be table stakes. So kind of in the swirl of all that. And I guess one more thing, kind of, I saw some people like it was like they're trying to replicate church functions at work.
Mm, mm,
Like you do the Bible study at lunch, or
mm-hmm,
and there's nothing wrong with all that. That's all fine. But again, I just knew God was calling me to something more than that, and so that's been the journey trying to figure that
mm-hmm,
out. And He's been very gracious. The whole process of crawling and then walking and maybe starting to jog a little, and
mm-hmm.
so
So
yeah.
you kind of built a pretty successful software company there in Frederick, and how do your employees think about what you do and what you I don't want to say preach, but what you talk about as far as God being the in the name of your company?
Yeah, so we hire. I mean, the qualifying factor for our employees isn't their faith or wherever they are in
Sure.
their spiritual journey. It's core values. We
Hmm.
based it all on core values, which are derived, of course, from my faith and my business partner's faith. He and I merged in 2003, so about a year and a half, maybe 2 years into the journey. I had a software no, I had a, yeah, I had a company, a consulting company with no clients and wanting to be a software company, and he had a software company with no customers.
Mm,
And so we put it all together in 2003. And so he shares my faith. That was all part of the equation of us
mm-hmm,
putting it together. But our employees don't necessarily. And so, oh, maybe once a year or something, we've got to go through something where I just don't even know how to express it in the corporate meeting without referring back to my faith. And you imagine we probably had a couple of those recently here with the whole
mm,
navigating the pandemic, and
sure.
we've been shifting our business model in the middle of the pandemic.
Hmm.
And so there have been, a couple times where I've had to say, look, you guys are going to have to give me some grace. I'm not trying to, thump you over the head with my Bible or anything, but this is the way I'm processing this, and I hope you'll understand. And they've been very good about it.
Hmm.
I mean, because I don't
Hmm.
force it on them. And I've had a few people come to me after such a meeting and say, "Hey, thanks for being so transparent, and I
Hmm.
appreciate that's real."
Hmm.
And so as long as it's respectful,
Hmm.
but if I'm going around leaving a tract on everybody's desk, that's probably not going to play real well
Sure.
here.
Sure.
So,
Yeah.
you know,
And so, how would you say? This podcast is called Explore Purpose, and what would you say is your purpose as an individual, as an owner, as a uh, I'm assuming you're married and have kids and maybe even grandkids. I don't know,
uh-huh.
but what would you say your purpose is
Yeah.
in life?
Well, that's a great question, and I know that's the core of the podcast here. So I was thinking about that a little bit, and it's really, I don't know what your other guests have experienced, Conrad, but for me, it's been more of an unfolding.
Mm,
Like I'd have told you one thing 20 years ago,
mhm,
and I was probably a little more aware of my purpose than all, because I went through a broken period that God took to bring me to my faith. And
mhm,
so there was this whole part of putting my life back together in purpose, in
mm,
an identity, and understanding who He made me to be. And so I was focused on purpose and identity, you know, 20, 30 years ago.
mhm,
25 years ago. So I've been at it for a while, but even so, he's kind of increased. It's been like the spear, and then the spear gets bigger.
mm,
So back then, I'd have told you, from a business standpoint, it was to build a company to glorify God. But then as time went on, and I continued to grow in my walk with Him, it became, I kind of had this inflection point where He kind of changed the questions on me and started asking, is it possible to build a company that looks more like His kingdom than the wrong one?
mm.
And well, that's a pretty big question. And that became part of my purpose, is to explore that. And of course, I think the answer is yes.
Mhm,
Now we're stumbling our way into that. But then he started asking me a bigger question: can an ecosystem of such companies help a community
mm,
look more like His kingdom than the wrong one? And and I think the answer is yes, but
mm,
I haven't even begun to push into that. But that's clearly part of my purpose. So, um, I guess, somebody in the faith might call it more of an apostolic kind of. My purpose is apostolic in nature,
Hmm.
transforming cultures,
Hmm.
um, whether that's in a company or in a community, so they look more like his kingdom. Um, but that's still unfolding,
Hmm.
So,
How does that sit
and I
in the?
don't you love that about God,
I
the way
do.
he just like you grow and about the time you think you've got it figured out, he said, "Oh no, there's more."
Yeah, there's more. You haven't even touched where you're going to be. That's the amazing thing
Yeah.
about having that walk. I know, my when I started out in college, in actually in high school, I actually gave a speech at my high school graduation, and I was the valedictorian only because I was the only senior. So uh, there's that. But my
That's
talk,
awesome.
I was at the bottom of my class, and they asked me to give a speech. So my talk though was, what is your purpose? That was the question. And so I've
Yeah.
kind of feel like my life has kind of come full circle, is now I'm exploring this in a deeper way. And I see what you mean, that, God, we start down this journey, but he unfolds and reveals more and more as we go. That's what challenges or hiccups have you experienced in living out that purpose in your life?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a bunch.
Mm.
I guess we'll see which path this heads down. I do feel like, in fact, I had a prophetic word about this, and you have to understand, I'm all open to the Holy Spirit telling me whatever He wants to through
Mhm,
whoever He wants to tell me, but I don't live in a prophetic culture normally in like in a home church, so it's a big deal when God gets a prophetic word personally to me
mhm,
more than a general one, because and I treasure it.
mhm,
And the prophetic word, it was basically about how God had me like planted in a container. He saw a container like a tree, and it was in a container,
mm,
and very carefully controlled in its growth. And it was time, and it was coming that it was going to be planted out in the field where it could grow big.
mm,
But and that was a couple of years ago, I got that, and boy, did that describe the journey so well.
mm,
Not the growing big part yet, but the planted in a container.
mhm,
And whether I think some of it came from the Lord keeping us in that container, or the enemy attacking and robbing and stealing and killing like he does, but the Lord using it for his purposes like he does. Um, boy, it's just felt because of this journey. Like if we wouldn't have put the name on the wall, I think we'd be 5 times our size.
mhm,
And I'm not saying that as any kind of excuse.
mhm,
I understand our role and our mistakes, and strategic errors we made and things we didn't do right in the business operations or the business model, and I get all that. But there were still, I can't count the number of times where we had an opportunity, a contract that was right there, and all the decision makers had bought off on it, and they had the money, and it was a big contract, for a company our size. It was a big multi-year government agency contract that was
mhm,
going to go on a long time, and was many millions of dollars, which moves the needle for us,
mhm,
and at the very last second, some crazy thing out of our control would happen, and it would
mhm,
just vaporize. There'd be a reorg, or something.
mhm,
And I can't tell you how many times we had that happen, like where it just felt like it was stolen from us in the most heartbreaking way possible.
mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
and
Wow.
and I am sure. And again, I'm not absolving us the responsibility of. We've made plenty of mistakes,
Mhm,
and yet at the same time, it's really felt because of that faith stand
mhm,
that we've taken a lot of hits.
mhm,
But I think that's part of God, that prophetic word about being planted in the field where we can grow big. Part of that is going to be like God also says, that
mhm,
in the days of Haman ended up getting hung on his own noose and had to pay
mhm,
back a whole bunch, like
mhm.
all his estate was given to those he was
Right.
persecuting, and the devil, Satan, is going to have to pay back what he's been
Mhm.
stealing,
Right.
and I think that's coming.
Mhm. What? Yeah, in a big way. What would you do different if you if you could go back 20 some years ago?
Oh wow, that's a well. let me just be candid and tell you, like, if I went back 20 years ago, I probably wouldn't started the company, because if I knew what I didn't know, like I know now what I didn't know back
Mhm.
then, and I don't know if I'd had enough faith to
Mhm.
start it at this
Mhm.
point. Back then, I was just naive enough where I'm like, well, if God is in this, it's going to work, right? And
Mhm.
and there's truth in that, but I was just naive enough to have enough faith. Like, I
Mhm.
didn't see all the reasons I needed to have faith.
Mhm. Right. Right.
And so on that side of it, I probably wouldn't even have started the company. On the other side
Mhm.
of it, man, I wish I would have given my life to him a lot sooner than I did. I'd have saved myself and some other people a lot of pain and
Mhm.
a lot of stupidity. But his grace,
Mhm.
his grace covers that. So I appreciate that.
Mhm.
Um, we made some mistakes in hiring in the early days that we learned from.
Mhm.
We better refined our processes to understand how to hire better, and we do a lot better job of that now. Um, but that's something I wish we'd have probably learned sooner. We had some missteps. We had some missteps with our technology. Would have been nice to have learned sooner.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that if we are given the whole picture, there's a lot of things we probably wouldn't do. We wouldn't take those risks, right? You know, we may
Exactly.
not even get married. We may not, you may just crawl into a box and, wither
Yep.
away, you know? Um, so
Yeah.
that's the great thing about not knowing those things. You don't know what you don't know. You don't know what you're going to face, and you're given enough grace to go
Yeah.
through it each day. And
Yeah. I would like to, can I circle back on something you said
sure.
earlier? Because I had a thought, and that I wanted to share, and it tied into purpose, and and the way our employees experience that.
Hmm.
And this, it ties into the question you just asked too. I wish I'd have gotten this sooner. When I first became a believer, I was so fired up, and I was all in, and that's just my personality, anyways.
Hmm.
Once I'm in, I'm all in. But I made the shift, and I knew I was all in, and they should have locked me in a room for a year, and not let me talk to anybody, because I was out pumping everybody over the head, and you need to do this too, and
Hmm.
and I had mellowed some, certainly, by the
Hmm.
time I kind of you know you know and God used that when I was He uses where you are,
Sure.
and He did. But I needed to be tempered and grow in maturity and grow in love, and there was a point a bit into my walk where I really began to understand that sometimes the best thing I could do, it wasn't about my words, um, or it wasn't even about my actions over a long period of time, that just carrying his presence, his peace, the fruit of the Spirit into a situation, just allowing somebody to experience God's goodness. It's God's goodness that leads to repentance,
Hmm.
is what the scripture says. And if I could just show them a taste of his goodness, sometimes that was the seed I was planting. That was the thing I was doing.
Hmm.
And of course, I'm always ready to talk if they want to talk. I mean, I've got the name on the side of the building. I'm unashamed. The
Hmm.
license plates in my car say praise God. So it's not that I'm ashamed to have a conversation with somebody if they're in a state where they're ready
Hmm.
for that
Hmm.
conversation. But I think too often I tried to force that conversation when I was younger, and I wish I'd have done that different.
Hmm.
To learn that sometimes if I just show some, and that's really the strategy we try here at a cultural level in the company, is mostly I'm just trying to show God's goodness. And that often will lead to an experience where an employee wants to understand what's behind that. And
Hmm.
I can talk to them in a way that gives them the grace to process it as they will and let Holy Spirit do his job rather than me trying to.
Hmm. So, in when you think of your business and the work that you guys do,
Hmm.
what motivates you towards success?
Um, well, I think there's part of that question is even understanding what success is,
Hmm.
right? How do you measure that? And honestly, that's been a challenge here at times, Conrad, because there's a way the world measures success. And if I look at those metrics, Well, we aren't the next Google,
Mm-hmm.
right? You know, the success picture that you get out of the world is the 23-year-old kid that drew the idea on the napkin, and now he's raised 100 million in venture, and he's got a $20 billion company, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're nothing like that.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, I told you about this long period we've gone through where sometimes it's felt we've been in a container and things have been
Mm-hmm.
stolen. And there have been many times I asked God, well, what kind of CEO am I if I can't, grow the company? We've been on this plateau for 2 years. And but then it always comes back to, do I have a gratitude? Because I look at all the blessings that come out of this. And when we haven't had what I've wanted, we've still had plenty of manna.
Mm-hmm.
We've had all that we needed.
Mm-hmm.
And if I look at the blessing the company has been to the community and to our employees, and all we've been able to give to local nonprofits, and our employees aren't going home and kicking the dog and beating their wife when they leave here. And if they are, it's not our fault. You can't say that about a lot of companies,
Right.
but in our case, it's pretty sure it's not our fault.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll add all that up, and the impact it's had on the town, the community, the county, and our employees. It's been a raging success.
Mm-hmm.
Just like sometimes you have to adjust your metrics.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think the outward visibility of that is coming. That's certainly what we believe and why we've positioned our business model the way we have. But, you know, that's an ongoing battle.
Mm-hmm. So what keeps?
I won't, I'll bet there's not a CEO you could interview that wouldn't say that many days he feels like he's just pretending to be a CEO.
Yeah.
Or she,
Imposter, what's called imposter syndrome or
yeah,
something like
yeah,
that.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So what keeps you focused when stuff's coming apart around you and things aren't, are plateauing? What keeps you focused on your purpose?
Yeah. Well, I think that's been a whole long journey of God kind of putting that in me, of me realizing that's part of what this container, being in this container, has been about. I've got it hanging on my, beside my computer on a sticky, seek first his kingdom
Mm,
in his righteousness, and the rest of these will be given to you as well. That scripture,
mhm,
and I've had that posted there for, well, and same at our previous office. So it's been by my computer for probably 20 years, and I can see, well, he's been giving me an assist in
mm,
that
mhm,
by keeping me in this container. I haven't been distracted by the other stuff. I've had to stay focused on the kingdom, and that's the value I've been getting out of it. But he's worked it deep in me. In fact, I had a test in that about 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. We had a potential bug in our software platform. We're shifting our business model, and there's a potential bug, and it affected our customers. And it's the kind of bug that had the potential to be a product killer, if not a company killer.
mm,
And I should have not been asleep for a week.
mhm,
And in fact, I'll tell you, if this was 10 years ago, I probably wouldn't have slept for a week. And my immediate thought, I just was right back to peace. And I was like, well, if God can heal this, all these documents, God can heal our software. And that was my very first thought. And as I stepped back from this and I wondered why, I'm really not too worried about this thing, that we're going to do it the right way. And that doesn't mean there's not going to be some pain from here to there, but we're going to be fine and we're going to do it right. And I just felt peace the whole time. And I, I think that's that journey
mm,
that oh, here's the fruit of 20 years of him working on me. This time I was at peace
mhm,
instead of not sleeping for a week.
mhm. Wow. Yeah. So a few years ago, you decided to go on a journey of writing a book. So
hmm
tell us why.
Well, really, I never dreamed of being an author, Conrad. I always wanted to be a rock star, so being an author wasn't even on my radar, and I still don't really consider, like, not my primary call or something. I mean, I knew I could write, but that's different than being an
Mm,
author. And so, but it just became apparent after the journey, and especially as I talked to a bunch of, and I'd struggled myself feeling like I was not on an island for so long and having trouble finding people to connect with on this journey, this business of at work as in heaven,
Mm-hmm.
which is the book title. I just did. I was getting the sense that I was supposed to write it, and as I started writing it, I could, became clear that yeah, this is what you're supposed to do, and and even when I finished the first draft, the editing team thought it was done, and I was ready to give it a final pass through, and I could just feel like the rewrite, like I knew it was him at work helping me to rewrite it. It just flowed out in a way, I was totally restructuring, moving sections here and there and everywhere, not so much generating new content as
Mm-hmm.
restructuring it all, and even that major rewrite. Um, it was just confirmation to me as it flowed out that this is what I'm supposed to do. And it's never like, for me, this was not so much about, like, I've got a day job, and 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 I will continue to be a practitioner. Even if this book sold 1 million copies, I'm not going to go be a consultant.
Mm-hmm.
That's not, it's not the entree for a new job or a new
Sure.
career. I will continue to start new businesses, or mentor kingdom businesses, and this will maybe help me as a handbook or a textbook.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll still be a practitioner. So the book is really just an outflow to get the message out there. This message of kingdom business, and so that's it, really.
So, did writing a book and kind of doing a deep dive into that, did it really what you maybe solidify your why?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I think maybe it brought some more clarity to my next steps.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of helped solidify the way ahead. Because I had all these little stories I'd collected and experienced and I'd tell in isolation, but then putting them all together in this big rewrite I just talked about, when it really kind of brought the structure into this different format than I was originally envisioning, really kind of set up, yeah. So it gave me a lot more clarity having done it.
Mm-hmm. That's something I'm thinking about doing in the future. Is I've always wanted to write something, and
Awesome.
so I'm thinking about doing
What are you going to
that.
write about?
Well, I'm probably going to be writing about purpose, and I'm kind of using my
Uh huh.
podcast as my research, and
Yeah.
talking to people and taking notes, and eventually, I want to have a book come out of this and the conversations that I've had.
Awesome.
So, so yeah, so
Then it will really will have come full
yeah,
circle.
so give me some good stuff, that I can put in the book.
Well, I hope so, but that's why you've got the edit button.
Exactly. Exactly. So, what would you say are the principles that drive you?
um, well, that's a great question, but I'm going to reframe
Okay.
it
Okay, go for
if I
it.
can.
Sure.
Is that like arrogant? Like
No, not at all.
turning the question around on the yeah. So that would have been a good question for me about 10 years ago.
Hmm.
But God, maybe 12 years ago, but God took me through this period, this inflection point, and it took me a while to figure out what he was saying. I eventually understood what he was saying was, I no longer call you servant, but friend,
Hmm.
and that it was time to stop or to move beyond doing stuff with him and into doing stuff for him.
Hmm.
I'm sorry, with him.
Hmm.
It was time to move beyond doing stuff
For
for
him.
him
Hmm.
and into doing stuff with him.
Hmm.
Finally get that right. See, it's a good thing you have the edit button. So in other words, I was moving from principle to presence.
Hmm.
And I would say that's what guides me now is presence. How connected am I? And if and some days that's not very well, not very well.
Hmm.
I'm not very well connected. I'm distracted. I'm caught up. I'm thinking of 10 other things. I'm, whatever.
Hmm.
Um, in other times, I'm very well connected.
Hmm.
And so, to me, that's the better
Hmm.
question. Is is how connected am I with his presence, and that's what guides.
hmm
That's the goal.
Yeah.
Although, like everybody, I'm just learning.
hmm
You know,
So,
can I get 20 minutes a day? That'd be awesome.
hmm
you know.
right, right. So, what distracts you?
Oh, just life, right? The phone call, the family, my son's basketball, the you know the fire, the that happens at work,
hmm
the macro environment, all the
hmm
crazy stuff going on outside, and I don't even watch the news, and it's hard to not let that stuff creep in and
hmm
put you in a bad mood, or so just there's all this distraction all around, and the challenge is to kind of elevate above it and get connected
hmm
and take that heavenly seat that the apostle Paul talks about
hmm
and
So, what's a
ride
part?
above it.
What's a part of your routine, perhaps your daily routine, your weekly routine, that keeps you on goal, on target?
Yeah, well, I find one thing that helps me personally, and I'm sure everybody's got something different, but personally for me, it's I need to get out and exercise.
hmm
If I can get out and get a hike in the woods or take my bike out and go for a ride, um, that's part of what I need to do to cut the distraction. To like leave the cell phone in the in the camelback instead of answering it, and then just exercising and being out in nature, then tend to start to get recentered, or if I've got some distractions or things, I'm processing through them and letting them go, and the longer I can spend out in the woods or on the bike or out in nature, then it seems the better centered I am. But that's just one thing.
hmm
I'm certainly reading scripture like would be the classic answer, and yeah, I do that too. But better still if I can,
hmm
latch onto a scripture and chew on it while I'm hiking.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. What would you say? This is a question that whenever I ask people, they would like kind of remind me what is that again? So how are you the same or different than who you are versus what you do? How are those two things the same or different?
Yeah, that's a great question. In fact, it's timely and relevant because I've been spending time working with my 14-year-old son
Mhm.
on that very thing here recently, and and I think they're well, let me say I don't know that there's a clean answer, because sometimes what you do isn't who you are,
Mhm.
but other times what you do is who you are,
Mhm.
and to the extent that what you do or things coming out of not just the unique skills and giftings that God has put in you, but they're also fully aligned with His purposes,
Mhm.
and you're kind of in that zone where everything's converged. Well, then what you do is who you are, because it's all an outflow of the identity that God has put in you and what He's created you with. But there's other times this thing that what you do, um, it's fine and it's good, and it may even use these things that God gives you, and it may just be something you enjoy, and
Mhm.
that's perfectly fine and legitimate. God's probably even pleased with that. It's just not part of His core purpose
Mhm.
for who you are. It's something that can go away,
Mhm.
in a different phase of your life, and well, then that's different. Then that's definitely not your identity. It's just this thing you do,
Mhm.
and so that's part of the wrestling of, well, what is this thing?
Mhm.
Is
Mhm.
this identity and purpose, or is it just some fun thing?
Yeah. Yeah. So when the time comes for you to sell your company or step away or go golfing on a regular basis or riding your bike,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
what how will your purpose be the same or will it change?
Yeah. Well, candidly, that's something I've been praying about for probably 4 or 5 years now, when God gave me this bigger question of, can a can an ecosystem of companies help a community
Mm,
look more like His kingdom? I know that's where I'm headed
mhm,
next. what I and I'll tell you one of the things he put on me. You'll appreciate this, Conrad. He really started showing. I haven't been back to Salem, Ohio, since my mother
Mm,
died a half a dozen years ago. But the Salem, Ohio that was there when my mother died was not the
mm,
Salem, Ohio that I grew up in.
sure.
All the buildings on Main Street were crumbling,
Mm,
and it was a beautiful historic Main Street, like Frederick
mm,
here has on a little bigger scale, but beautiful, like a beautiful place. Great hardworking people when I grew up, and we were probably already past our decline
mm,
when I was growing up. I mean, on our
mm,
decline, past our peak of prosperity, but the community didn't know it yet. It was
mm,
Mayberry,
right.
and now
Mm,
like the
yeah.
crumbling, like I said, and there's this cynicism and bitterness. I see it on Facebook, from
Hmm.
people I know post like it wasn't there when I was
Mm,
there. The community was for you, not against you, and now it's not. That doesn't even exist anymore. And the houses my friends grew up in were like now they're meth
mm,
houses, and all that. God, so well, why could an ecosystem of companies help
mm,
someplace like Salem
mm,
or Cumberland, Maryland, or pick your favorite,
mhm,
or wherever in Indiana? Like, could it help some Rust Belt community look more like his kingdom?
mm,
And so my purpose is engaged in that somehow.
mhm,
Starting with Frederick here,
mhm,
because this is my hometown now, and I love it. But um, I've been praying for a lot of years into whether Yakabod, this company, is the platform for that,
mhm,
or whether it's a prototype
mm,
for that.
mm,
And I don't know yet
mm,
after all these years. And part of the challenge is just that my business partner is not called to that
mhm,
same thing, and that's okay. He's a great business partner, and we have a great relationship, and we brought it here together. Not one or the other of us. It's only here because the two of us have worked together, and he loves Jesus, and but but Jesus has something different for
mhm,
him, and that's okay.
mhm,
I just don't know yet whether what the resolution of that
mm.
is. And
Boy,
so
it'd be really interesting to look at this 20 years from now to see what has happened with that.
it will be. Yeah. Well, when you get back from your bike tour, see, maybe I'll come join you so I can help figure it
There you
out.
go.
Like that's the way. Then I've got a couple months to process it and
Yeah,
try and figure it out.
exactly. Yep. Uh, so I like to ask this: what's a practical thing someone can do? Perhaps they're a business owner, a CEO, they run a company. What's a practical thing that they can do to begin to move their business, their company, their even their life toward more of a God focused business or company or
Yeah.
life?
Yeah, look, the first thing I'd suggest is it just takes that intentionality of wanting to, right? And God will meet you where you are.
Mm,
So just start talking to him, just start praying and saying, well, what's the next step, Lord? Hey, I really want to take another step with you here, and I want to grow in this, and how can I do that? And I'm willing to bet he's ready to do that, and he will do that. He'll meet you there and show you because you know I've, it might get a little. I even say in the book it might get a little overwhelming because I've got 20 years
hmm.
of stumbling through this kind of condensed in a book. Well, it's 300 and some pages, so I don't know how condensed, but
How big are the print? How
but
big is the
still,
print?
yeah, that's still 20 years worth, 20
Mhm,
some years, worth of journey in there. And if you're just crawling, that's okay. There's no shame in that. God's just excited and happy that you're coming to talk to him and say, hey, I want more.
mm,
I want to push into this more with you, and he'll give you some next steps. And that may be some simple principle. It may be a simple matter of let's take the golden rule
mm,
and and let's see that implemented through your company, or through your area of influence. Maybe you aren't even, you don't own the
mhm,
company. Maybe, you're working in a line role in a department. Well, that's okay. If you could just through influence kind of spread the golden rule and kind of carry that into there, and kind of through influence,
mm,
not by mandate, kind of see that happen. Boy, wouldn't that be a
mm.
pretty big
Yeah,
impact on that workplace for a lot of people?
yeah.
because there are a whole bunch of companies you and I have dealt with, on a daily basis,
Mm-hmm.
typically, that have no sense of the golden rule.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
So,
it might just be that simple.
wow. So, speak to that person who's listening or watching who they don't really have a connection with God. What does that mean for them? For a person like that?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's your choice. God's not going to force himself on you, but ask yourself, how's it working out for you? That's where he brought me to the point where I was doing everything I was supposed to be doing that culture told me
Mhm.
to do to have a good life. I was doing all of it and I was doing pretty well. And I kept getting emptier and emptier inside. And I'll bet if you're kind of trying to walk through life without God, I'll bet you're feeling some of that too. If you really, and I'll bet some of those things you're doing are probably just anesthesia
Mhm.
because you're feeling it. So again, God's not going to force himself
Mhm.
on that person, but he's waiting with open arms when you realize it's not quite working.
Mhm.
And that's the point I had to come to, is I had to get to the point where it wasn't. I realized it wasn't working, and then he was right there to, and boy, he's blessed me more than I ever could have imagined,
Mhm.
Conrad. And it hasn't looked like I would have pictured necessarily, but and all the silly reasons I thought I couldn't come to him, they ended up being religious stuff that he didn't care about anyways,
Mhm.
and that he changed my perspective on anyways.
Mhm.
So God will work through you with all that stuff, and he just you know
Mhm.
ask yourself if it's working out.
Yeah. Yeah. Very good. Well, tell us where we can find the book and how we can get a hold of it.
Yeah, so you can go to Amazon like just about any other book, and that's probably the best place to get it because you can order it from Amazon. It's called At Work as in Heaven, and they'll get it to you in a day or two. Whereas if takes me a month to get them from my stock from the printing house. So you're pretty. Just go to Amazon, At Work as in Heaven, and they'll get it to you quick, paperback, hardback, or even there's a Kindle version too. And I'd love to hear from you if you have questions. So
Awesome. Well, we'll put a link in the show notes below, and so people can link directly to it and order it. The book is called At Work as in Heaven. Scott Ryser has been my guest today on the Explore Purpose podcast. Scott, thank you so much for your insight, for your wisdom, and for the work that you're doing through your company and through your life. Appreciate that.
likewise, Conrad, I'm excited to see what happens with your podcast. It's an important topic.
Great.
So,
Thank you.
Blessings.
Thank you. Thanks, Scott, for taking time to talk with me today. And if you enjoyed our conversation and want to deeper dive into the subject we're talking about, pick up Scott's book, At Work as in Heaven, on Amazon. The link is in the show notes below. And if you enjoyed today's podcast, please subscribe and leave a review and a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. I love 5-star ratings. And I'd love to hear what you thought about the show and how you are living out your purpose. Until next time, go out and make an impact by living life with purpose. Thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you again next time on the Explore Purpose podcast.